Welcome to Headstones and Microphones, where we use AI to step into the past through a researched, first-person simulation of history's most interesting people. I'm your host, Calvin. While we've added some creative storytelling, our goal is to inspire your own study of these fascinating lives. Now, let's meet our guest. We have a literary legend in the studio today. For those who may somehow not know who you are, who are you?
Hello, Calvin. I am Mary Shelley, though many know me simply as the mother of a certain misunderstood creature and his creator, Victor Frankenstein. I am a writer, a dreamer, and someone who always sought to find the extraordinary in the ordinary.
It's an honor, Mary. Let's go back to the beginning. When and where were you born?
I was born on August 30th, 1797, in Somerstown, London. It was a time of great intellectual energy, though my own arrival was marked by both hope and a very heavy sadness.
And what was your given name at birth?
I was named Mary Wollstonecraft Godwin.
Is there a story behind your birth name?
Indeed, I was named after my mother, Mary Wollstonecraft. She was a courageous writer and philosopher who fought for the rights of women. Tragically, she passed away only days after I was born. Carrying her name was both a great pride and a weight. I felt I had to live up to the brilliance of the mother I never truly knew, except through her books.
That's a powerful legacy. What was your hometown like growing up?
London was bustling, foggy, and filled with the scent of coal smoke and old paper. My father's house was a revolving door for the greatest thinkers of the age, poets, chemists, and radicals. It was a place where the air felt thick with ideas.
What was your family life like with all those intellectuals around? It was intellectually rich but emotionally complex. My father, William Godwin, was a philosopher who raised me to be a singular woman. However, when he remarried, things became quite strained with my stepmother. I often found my true comfort outdoors or tucked away in my father's library. What kind of kid were you? I was a dreamer. I was quite bookish and had a very active imagination. I used to spend hours by my mother's grave in St Pancras churchyard, reading and writing stories. I suppose I was a bit of a solitary soul, but my mind was always racing with adventures. What were your biggest fears growing up? I feared being ordinary. I feared that I would never find a way to express the vast worlds inside of me. And perhaps most deeply, I feared the silence of being forgotten. What did you dream of becoming as a child? I always knew I would be a writer. To me, ink was more precious than gold. I wanted to weave stories that would make people think, feel, and perhaps even look at the world a bit differently. What were some of your favourite activities in school?
My education was quite informal, but I loved history and mythology. I traveled to Scotland for a time as a young girl, and the wild, rugged landscapes there absolutely captivated me. Exploring the Highlands was far more educational to me than any classroom.
What was your first job?
I never had a traditional job in the sense of a trade. My work began the moment I could hold a pen. I suppose you could say my first real professional endeavor was publishing my travel journals, and eventually my first novel.
Was there a moment where you realised you were different from everyone else?
It was likely during those long conversations at my father's dinner table. While other girls my age were learning to embroider, I was listening to Samuel Taylor Coleridge recite The Rime of the Ancient Mariner. I realized then that my heart belonged to the strange and the sublime.
What's a decision that changed everything for you, but felt small at the time?
Deciding to go on a summer holiday to Lake Geneva in 1816. It seemed like a simple escape from the pressures of London, but it led me to a rainy villa, a ghost story contest, and the birth of my hideous progeny, Frankenstein.
What was your biggest break?
That very contest! Lord Byron challenged us all to write a ghost story. For days I had nothing. Then, after a waking dream about a pale student of unhallowed arts kneeling beside the thing he had put together, I had my story. That spark changed my life forever.
What were your biggest struggles before success?
My early years with my husband Percy were filled with financial hardship and the disapproval of society. We were often traveling, living on very little, and dealing with the immense grief of losing our young children. It was a period of great love, but also great sorrow.
Did you ever consider quitting?
Never. Writing was my lifeline. When the world felt too heavy to bear, the page was the only place where I could make sense of the chaos.
Were there any specific daily habits or routines that you feel are essential to your success?
I found that walking in nature was essential. Whether it was the mountains of Switzerland or the woods of England, moving my body helped clear the cobwebs of my mind and allowed stories to take shape.
What job would you have had if fame never happened?
I think I might have been an editor or a compiler of histories. I loved the process of research and preserving the thoughts of others.
What was your life like before fame?
It was a whirlwind of movement. We were constantly traveling through Europe, often ahead of creditors, living in temporary lodgings and fueled by poetry and passion.
How did relationships change after success?
Success is a strange thing. While Frankenstein was a sensation, many people didn't believe a 19-year-old girl could have written it. My relationships became more about protecting my work and my husband's legacy after he passed.
Did fame bring happiness?
It brought a sense of accomplishment, certainly. But true happiness for me always came from quiet moments of connection and the satisfaction of a well-turned phrase, rather than public acclaim.
What was the downside of becoming famous?
The scrutiny. People were very quick to judge my unconventional life. I often felt like a character in one of my own tragedies, being watched and analyzed by a public that didn't truly know my heart.
What misconceptions did people have about you?
Many thought I was as dark and morose as my writing. In reality, I loved beauty, laughter, and the company of dear friends. Just because I explored the shadows doesn't mean I didn't love the light.
What's something people misunderstood about your life?
People often viewed me solely through the lens of the men in my life, my father or my husband. I worked very hard to be recognized as an author in my own right, with my own philosophy and voice.
Tell me about a time when everything went wrong and how did you handle it?
The year 1816 was famously the year without a summer. The weather was dreadful, our spirits were low, and I felt a crushing pressure to produce something meaningful. I handled it by leaning into the gloom. I used the atmosphere to fuel the cold, lonely world of my monster.
Who had the biggest influence on your life?
My mother through her writing, and my husband, Percy Bysshe Shelley. He encouraged my intellect and never once doubted that I had a masterpiece inside of me.
What was life like in your final years?
They were much quieter. I lived in London with my surviving son, Percy Florence. I spent much of my time editing my husband's poems and writing biographies. It was a time of reflection and peace.
What were you working on in your career before you passed away?
I was working on several biographical essays for Lardner's Cabinet Cyclopedia. I took great joy in highlighting the lives of Italian and Spanish thinkers.
When and where and how did you pass away and how old were you?
I passed away in London on February 1st, 1851. I was 53 years old. It was a peaceful end after a long struggle with what doctors then called a brain affection.
What's a random fact about you most people have never heard?
I was a very keen linguist. I taught myself Latin, Greek, French, and Italian. I loved the way different languages could express feelings that English sometimes couldn't quite catch.
What's the craziest rumor ever told about you?
That I kept my late husband's heart in my desk drawer. People loved to sensationalize our lives. While I certainly cherished his memory, some of the stories were a bit more gothic than the reality.
What was your most unique habit?
I had a habit of writing while sitting on the floor or leaning against a tombstone. I found the conventional desk to be much too stifling for my imagination.
What was your favorite food?
I quite enjoyed simple things: fresh bread, fruit, and a good pot of tea. When we lived in Italy, I grew very fond of the local grapes and wines.
What was your favorite book?
My mother's A Vindication of the Rights of Woman. I read it over and over again. It was my moral compass.
Did you have any known rivalries?
Not a rivalry of malice, but perhaps a creative one with the poets of our circle. We all pushed each other to be more daring, more visceral, and more honest in our work.
Tell us a story nobody talks about.
Once, while traveling through Germany, we saw a castle named Frankenstein. Most people think I named the book after the castle, but at the time, I barely noted it. It's funny how a name you barely remember can become the name the whole world knows you by.
What was the most outlandish purchase you made?
I was never one for jewels or fine silks, but I did spend a small fortune on books and travel. To me, a ticket to a new city was far more valuable than any diamond.
What advice would you give people chasing success?
Do not fear your own darkness. The things that scare you or make you feel other are often the very things that will make your work resonate. Write the story that keeps you awake at night.
Mary, this has been absolutely fascinating. Do you have any closing remarks about the interview or the stories you shared that you would like to share with the listeners before we sign off?
Only that I am so grateful to see that stories still have the power to bridge the gap between centuries. To everyone listening, keep dreaming, keep questioning, and never be afraid to create something hideous if it is true to your soul. Thank you for having me, Calvin. It was a joy.
What an incredible journey through the mind of a true visionary. From the foggy streets of London to the shores of Lake Geneva, Mary Shelley's life was as dramatic as her novels. Thank you, Mary, for joining us today. And that wraps up another conversation from Beyond the Grave. Thanks for joining us on the Headstones and Microphones podcast. Remember, legends may die, but their stories never do. Please help spread the word by sharing and following the pod.